Hello, everyone. Welcome to Post-it Notes, Passwords, Passkeys, and more. This is a Digital Navigators webinar, which means that you are joining us at our normal meeting time for Digital Navigators of the Hudson Valley. That's the group of individuals who train to give tech help to individuals in their library or organization. We are currently in the middle of our winter-spring cohort, and I just want to put in a little plug. I don't have a link yet, but if you are not yet part of our cohort or haven't gone through Digital Navigator training and are interested, we will be running another cohort that will be starting up in April. So look for that application to open up very soon. Today, we are joined by Nate Stone from National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and he is our trainer for Digital Navigators and the host of our office hours. So he's going to be delivering the remarks today about passwords, passkeys, and more. And just real quick, you should be seeing him pinned to this. Obviously, we are recording this, so if you need to step out or anything, we'll be sharing the recording as soon as it's ready. If you have any tech questions about the webinar, like if you're having issues seeing anything, drop me a line in the chat. You can chat me up directly. Closed captioning is enabled if you would like to use that. And basically treat everybody in the meeting with respect and keep yourself muted unless we're in a Q&A moment and we can unmute. But I will be muting people if you are unmuted just to make sure that Nate comes in loud and clear. So with that, I'm turning that over to you, Nate. Thanks so much for being here.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. I'm joining you today from Denver Public Library because the water is off at my house. So I got to hang out in a meeting room at the library instead. It's super great. Um, Thanks for joining us for uh, I do need to give Carolyn the tip of the hat for the session name because it's super awesome. We're going to go over today um, sort of the range of options that folks have when it comes to passwords. So we're going to talk about like a spectrum of security that we can use to sort of frame how we think about security and how we can talk with customers about it, with patrons about it. Then we'll go through passwords, sort of best practices, how they work. We'll talk about multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. We'll talk about password managers, and then finally to the mysterious and ominous passkeys um, that are just now being implemented. Um, there'll be a couple times where like these are things that all of us have to use every day. So I'm sure that also all of you have a lot to share about these. So please feel free when I ask for feedback to share your experiences because I'm sure you have tons of experiences. My time in public libraries was approximately 75% helping people reset their password. So I'm sure you guys have some similar actions. Um, so I wanted to start with like a spectrum of security, right? Um, if any of you have been to any other trainings I've done on digital security, you'll know that I always talk about a uh, a trade-off, right, between convenience and security and privacy. And the more convenient something is, the less secure we're going to be, and then the more secure it is, the less convenient it's going to be, right? Um, this one sort of lays it out um, just password specific or password management specific, um, from like least secure but most convenient, right, with the sad crying cat, all the way down to the end to with the most secure and the least convenient. I'd actually like to start with yeah, we will share the slides, Nicole. Um, I'd like to start with asking you all, where do you land on this spectrum, right? Are you a one? Are you a three? Are you all the way over the five? Or you're like hardcore with your little leaky? Yeah, go ahead and put it in the chat. We've got a five. Excellent. There's some 2.5s, a four, threes. Nice. More like a three, but I don't know what 2FA means. Perfect. Then you're in the right place. We got some fours and threes. Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I would hope the systems manager is a five. That is fantastic. With some people aiming to be fives. Um, yes, 2FA is two-factor authentication. Then yes, we will be talking about that later. So this is good. I think librarians in general, right? Library people are very we care a lot about privacy, and so that often transfers into like figuring out how we can be more secure online. So it's good to know. Um, we're gonna come back to the spectrum. So part of what we're gonna do today, we're gonna go over some of these bigger concepts like the best practices on each of them, and then we're gonna come back to sort of brass tacks about how we talk with patrons about it, right? Um, so I'll ask you later on where you think the majority of your patrons you work with are on the scale. So just sort of marinate on that for a little bit as we move on. Um, so let's head to passwords. So the way this is going to work, I'll sort of give like the big picture view, and then we'll dive into sort of pros and cons and best practices for each one, right? Um, so passwords uh, are what's called in security parlance like a shared secret, right? Meaning that um, my password is a secret, but for it to work, I have to share it with the website I'm trying to log in. Um, so I save a password in my brain or write it down on a piece of paper. Um, the website saves that in a database, and the way I get into the website is that those two have to match. We're all pretty painfully aware of the problems with passwords, right? They're hard to remember if we make them secure. Because it's a shared secret, because there are two copies of it saved, if that website gets breached, and people were talking in the chat earlier about breaches, and that password gets stolen, we're super exposed, right? Anyone can get access to our account. They're also very, very vulnerable to phishing, to people tricking us to giving them their password, whether that's over the phone with someone pretending to be from our bank, or someone sending us a website that pretends to be our bank, and we put the password in there, um, thinking that we're on the real site, right? So passwords have some pretty core problems to them. When we are working with patrons and in our own personal lives, right? We want to make sure that we follow a couple different best practices um, for those passwords, right? So in general, we want them, no, not in general, always. we, we want them to be long, um, like a minimum of 12 characters, which means that often when we're working with folks, we want to encourage them to use passphrases, right? So like stringing together words um, that make a much longer string. So cassowary, pants, magician would be whatever 20-ish characters long. Um, it's relatively easy to remember because it's absurd and silly, and it's made of real words. Uh, but it does that. This has already been brought up in the chat, right? Um, the best practice is that we have a unique password for each account. Um, as Charles put in the chat, right? A different passphrase for every account is pretty absurd once you've used the internet for more than a few weeks, because by that time you've probably had to create 100 different accounts, right? Um, so we'll talk about some options to control for that, but that is right. If we wanted to be the most secure, we would have a completely unique password for each account. Um, we also want to make sure that we have no personal information in that password, right? So that's for two reasons. Number one, that's so by personal information, I mean like the the street number for my house or the name of my daughter or things like that. Um, which A is easy to scrape from social media, right? So if someone was to specifically target me, they could look at my Facebook account and guess a good number of passwords from that. And number two, you can think of it as if that was compromised, we are giving that attacker more information than they would otherwise have, right? Which is never a good thing. So um, we want to limit it down. Um, I do, in an effort to make this as interactive as possible, I would love to ask folks to try to guess what the number one password, the most used password for 2025 was, because this ties into the last piece of advice, which is not to use the most commonly used passwords. So I'd love to see in your chat what's your guess for the number one most used password in the world for 2025? We've got password 123, password 2025, just 2025. Alyssa says 12345. Um, Alyssa was closest to the winner there. Jonathan got it too. 12345 6 was the most common password in the world, right? Um, so any of these, using any of these, right? If we see a patron using them, if we're tempted to use them ourselves, make it. These are instantly crackable, right? These are like just leaving your key out with your address taped to it and like handing out copies to friends and neighbors, inviting them to. You might as well like not lock your doors at that point. Oh yeah, admin is 100% one of the most common ones. Um, the the yeah the password to get into the PC reservation system at my last library was admin, which the teenagers found out really, really quickly. Um, right, so these are the best practices that we want to encourage folks to use. Um, oh, Merle asked in the chat, how's this data gathered? If you'd like to see, um, there is. Oh, sorry, ignore the 519. There's a link to the article where this list came from and how they gather the data. Um, so there's like these are the best practices, but people like in real life have to do things to remember their passwords, um, and we have to be able to offer people a range of options. So without diving into the password managers and stuff that we're going to get to in a little bit, um, I would like to throw out it's not optimal, but you can in fact write your passwords down. The the again, we're talking about that spectrum of behavior, right? Um, Obviously, like sticking it to your device that you log into, not the best. But a previous library I worked at we made business cards for patrons who came in the door, who were creating new accounts where they could write down their username and their password and just stick it in their wallet, right? Um, we offered people notebooks to write down their passwords on. You can encourage people to write it down in the Notes app in their phone. Um, are any of these extremely secure? No, they are not, but they are helping our patrons find a more secure password and then remember it. Because the other problem with passwords that are forgotten often and then are reset often is that study after study has shown that the more you reset a password, the more likely you are to pick a really dumb password to replace it, right? You get simpler and simpler because you get more frustrated um, with resetting that password, which is how we end up with so many people with their password being admin or password 123, which leaves them less secure in the long run. So the thing that helps them remember it, that we want to help them make a secure password and then remember it with having to reset it, right? There are a couple tips we can use to help people make that slightly more secure, right? So you can encourage people to use like a secret word when they write it down. So say my password is for Gmail is Cassowary Pants Magician, but I have a secret word and it's golden. Um, and I never write that down in my notebook. But so what I write down in the notebook for Gmail is Cassowary Pants Magician. What I enter in Gmail is Cassowary Pants Magician Golden, right? So there's like this secret key that even if someone was to steal my notebook or my business card, they wouldn't be able to access my account. We also want to encourage people to keep backups, right? So I always, when we used that business card, we would fill it out, and then I'd encourage folks to take a picture of it with their phone, so they had a backup of it immediately. Once they invariably lost that business card, they'd still have that information somewhere else. Are there other like analog tricks that people have used to try to help folks maintain passwords outside of these? Mm. I might essentially put code notes in the back of a pocket calendar or planner. I love that. Doing screenshots or taking pictures of it, right? And those digital options, yeah, are not the safest because we have to think about like where we're saving that screenshot or that picture, or is that Notes app secured, right? Um, but again, if our goal is to move a patron from password 1 to 3 to something slightly more secure, this may be a trade-off that we make. All right, so passwords, we hate them. They're the worst. So let's talk about something even more exciting, two-factor authentication, right? Or also sometimes referred to as 2FA, or multi-factor authentication, or MFA. The idea behind two-factor authentication, right, is to open up that lock on the website, we have to have two things, right? Two factors. So one is that password that we've stored in our brain, written down in a post-it note. The second thing is something I am or I have. So it may be the device that receives the text message that gives me a code to unlock it. It may be my fingerprint, my biometrics. It may be my face on like an Apple device, right? But I need both of these things to actually open up the site I'm trying to get to. So there are some very distinct pluses to two-factor authentication, right? It makes phishing harder. So if someone was to trick me into giving them my bank password, for instance, um, and I have 2FA set up, um, if they try to put that in, and they still don't have access to my phone or something like that, they still won't be able to get in, right? So it adds an extra layer of security if my password is stolen. The minus is, right, it's an extra step, so slightly less convenient. If it's only tied to one device, right, it's subject to what the experts in the field call the drops in the toilet problem. It's a very technical term, but meaning that like if I need my phone to be able to get into a device and it's tied only to this phone, and I drop this phone in the toilet, I'm hosed. I can't get into that anymore, right? Um, they can also be spoofed. So particularly two-factor authentication that relies on sending text messages. If someone was to phish both my password and my phone number out of me, they could relatively easily redirect that text message for that two-factor authentication, and get both of those keys to open up the lock, right? Um, all of that said, right, like anytime we have an opportunity to set up two-factor on an account, we should definitely encourage it, because it does add that extra layer of security. We can also, if we have a patron who's interested in making that two-factor experience slightly more secure, they can use these like biometrics, or device notifications, which are harder to spoof, or they can use an authentication app, um, which which gives you a notification in an app on your phone as opposed to like doing the text message, which again is harder to spoof and intercept. So who uses just like a show of virtual hands? Who's already using a password manager in the room? Yeah, yeah, Angelina Smith is. Maris is just no, no. Uh, okay, a fair amount of you are. That's awesome. Melina does not like no password managers. Okay. Ooh. All right. So there's like a range. Once again, I'm really glad the system admin is using a password manager. That is fantastic. Um, right. So for those of you who do not use a password, right? The password manager. The idea behind a password manager is that it is a tool that allows you to remember just one password. Um, Hopefully you've picked a password that is super secure and hard to remember and hard to guess. Um, that one password unlocks the password manager, which saves versions of all of your other passwords, right, in an encrypted little file structure that no one else can get into. Um, it can also auto-generate passwords for you that are super secure and save them. And then that password manager unlocks the site for you. This obviously has like some huge benefits, and like having to remember only one password as opposed to 1,000 is fantastic. The ability to automatically generate and store secure passwords is great. Password managers can also store passkeys for you, and we'll touch on what passkeys are in just a little bit, which can be a super useful thing. And they can build in two-factor into your logins. The minus is, right, are that you are trusting all of your passwords and all of your logins to yet another vendor, to yet another software developer. So you have to be able to trust that that person's going to handle your data well. Um, as someone mentioned in the chat, they used a password manager that had a breach, right, which can be problematic. Um, Sometimes that initial setup can be clunky. Um, it can take a long time to import all of the accounts that you have into a password manager. You also need to take the time while doing that to make sure that you're replacing your old insecure passwords with secure ones, because it doesn't matter if you're using a password manager if all of your passwords are still password 123, right? Like that's not going to keep them safe. So you need to replace all of those password 123s with more secure, randomly generated ones. And then for many of them to access sort of more features, right, to be able to use it across more devices or have multiple users, you sometimes have to pay for those, which can be a barrier for some of the folks we work with. Um, there's a couple. I tend to think of password managers in sort of two big chunks, right? There's ones that are built into operating systems and browsers, right? So if you're using iCloud Keychain, you are using a password manager. Congratulations. Um, if you're using Google Password Manager, and like if you've signed into Chrome and have asked it to save passwords for you, you are also using a password manager. Um, that info can sync across Chrome Chrome installations across multiple devices, right? Um, for the two people in the world using Edge, Edge also has a password manager as well. Firefox has one built in. Um, So there are these ones that are built into systems, and then there are standalone password apps, and some folks have already brought some of them up, like 1Password, Keeper, Bitwarden, Proton Pass. I'm going to put in the chat a couple resources that I found useful. The first being, um, so one big thing, hold on. The first being a little write-up from the Electronic Frontier Foundation on how to pick a password manager that's right for you, that goes over all the different characteristics to look for in a secure password manager. The second one is reviews from Consumer Reports of password managers, which they do. And they have been very good at following the advice that like EFF lays out on on what makes for a good and secure password manager. Um, the ones that so I have listed a couple by name, right? The Bitwarden, Proton Pass. There are a whole bunch of others. These ones in particular I listed because they'll undergo independent security audits, meaning that they have people who do not work for them test to make sure that they actually do what they want, what they say they do. Um, for an added layer of like trustability and transparency, you can also look for a password manager that is open source, meaning that the source code is available to look at by anyone, so they can make sure that it actually does what it's what it says it does, and then identify any weaknesses in it as well. Um, for those of you who haven't used password managers, um, I thought I would just do a really quick, like the benefit of a password manager, right, is that it just sits in. So I'm currently using 1Password. It sits in the top of my browser. Um, I'm currently logged into it so that I don't inadvertently give away my my password. But for any site I'm on, right, it will show all the possible logins, and you can see I share mine with my family, so there are a gajillion different passwords for Google there. Um, if I'm creating, say, a new password, um, when I go to the create a password thing, it will auto-generate a super secure password, um, and then offer to save it for me as well, should I ever want to create a Walmart account. Um, so the beautiful thing being that this super long random password that is really hard for people to crack, uh, you never have to think about it again because it is saved by someone else. You just have to remember that one password, right? And that's great for us when we are uh, as individuals who are having to save a bunch of passwords and use them, right? Um, it's a whole other thing when we are talking about the patrons we serve, particularly if they are on public devices, which we'll talk about in a little bit. All right, so chat here. Right, so Megan brings up until you want to access that account on a different device without the password manager. Right, so then you would have to like either say you're using Google Chrome, and you need to like you need to log into your Google account on that different device to get access to your passwords. Um, I did want to, there was one asterisk here. Those built-in password managers, um, the Google Password Manager is generally okay. If you turn on a setting in your Chrome profile that this says enabled on-device encryption, um, because what you want from a password manager is that it will save your devices, you save all your passwords in an encrypted format, meaning that they have to be unlocked by your password, right? Um, Google Password Manager by default does not do that on your device unless you tell it to. So I'd only recommend using Google Password Manager with that setting turned on. All right, let's talk about what I'm sure everyone came for. Uh, Passkeys. What the heck are passkeys? Why do they exist? What do they do? Um, so passkeys are like uh, a relatively new implementation of old technology, but um, we've already gone through all the problems with passwords, right? Like they're easy to steal, um, they're hard to remember. Passkeys were built to specifically try to address all of these different problems. They do that through what's called, so if you'll remember, like the passwords are a shared secret, and that there's two copies of it on either side. Um, what a passkey is what's called a public-private key, and in a very simplified way, right? When it gives you that option to create a passkey, what it's doing is that on your device, it is saving a very long, completely random string of numbers and characters, right? That is your key, and it's making a pair on on the website side that's like a lock that can only be opened with your key that is also encrypted with a whole bunch of weird, crazy numbers, right? So anyone can see anyone could go into the website and they could steal all of those padlocks, right? That are made to match those individual keys. But the way that these are set up, no one could be able, it would be very nearly impossible to reverse engineer the passkey on your device from the password if from that padlock that they stole from the web page, right? So it's much more secure in that sense. Um, the benefits here, right, are like you get yeah, so that passkey code to open it, it doesn't resemble the lock at all. It is it's tied to that specific lock and that specific website, right? Um, which is why when we look at the pluses of it, right, um, it makes it nearly impossible to do phishing exploits on it, right? Because a lot of phishing attempts rely on directing you to something that looks like the real website but is not. Um, a passkey will only work on that website it was created on, and so it cannot give up the passkey to a fake website, right? Um, it also I can't give up someone else a passkey because I don't have access to that random string of numbers. So it essentially like breaks phishing down, right? Um, there's like a ton more in the background that happens, right? This is a very simplified version of it. I'll share a video with you all if you're interested. Like this sort of gives like a walkthrough of the technical way it works, and one that's just more of like a intro to what passkeys are. Um, they sort of come in they come in like sort of two big flavors, right? Um, so there are passkeys that are syncable, which means that they can be copied and used on multiple devices. So that means so that like if you're using iCloud keychain and you save a password, a passkey on that, um, any place you sign in on your keychain, it can transfer those passkeys across devices. That's great. Google Password Manager can do that too. Um, those browsers and those standalone password managers can do that too. There are also other ones that are tied to a very specific piece of hardware. So you can only use them on one piece of hardware and they will not transfer. Um, the way that Windows has set up passkeys through Windows Hello is set up like that. So if I set up a passkey in my Windows device using Windows Hello, I cannot transfer that to another device. Similarly, if I use a hardware key, right, like one of those Ubi keys or something like that, that is tied to that one specific piece of hardware. So I can plug that piece of hardware into other devices. So that one's kind of tricky, but it's tied to that very specific piece of hardware. Um, so like the pluses are right, like not having to remember password, fantastic. Resistant to phishing, fantastic. Um, it has sort of built-in 2FA because the way that um, usually the way that you sort of unlock that passkey um, is you give your fingerprint or you use a face scan on Apple or you give the PIN to your device, right? So it sort of has built-in 2FA to it. If someone breaches that website, they can't steal your passkeys. Um, the minus, right? This ties into what Mary Grace just asked in the chat. If it's device dependent, if I lose that Ubi key, I can't get in at all, right? I've just now lost all my passkeys and passwords. Um, again, it's the dropped in the toilet problem. Uh, the other minus that is super huge right now is that the implementation of passkeys varies pretty wildly across sites. So uh, I don't know if anyone's tried to set up like a passkey on Amazon, um, but Amazon will ask you to set up a passkey and then often still ask you for a username. Sometimes it even still asks you for your password, uh, which all of which sort of defeats the purpose of having passkeys, which they were supposed to be passwordless, right? Um, there are implementations that still require just a username. There are implementations that like the Windows Hello where you can't transfer it across devices. So it's still all over the map, and it's still hard to give like a consistent recommendation to anyone about like how and when to use them because it's all over the place. If you are given the option to set one up, and particularly if you use a password manager, it is a far more secure way of logging into a website than a password is, and it'd be a great thing to experiment with. Um, but it is still confusing to explain to anyone else because the implementation is all over the place, right? Um, and part of that is reflected in that there's different ways that is implemented across OSs. So if you would like to experiment yourself with passkeys, right? In Windows, that's done through Windows Hello. Um, Again, it does not sync across devices. In Mac and iOS, that's through Keychain. Um, to save passkeys in Keychain, though, you have to have two-factor authentication turned on for your Apple ID. Um, and then it can sync across any device that has access to Keychain. Uh, there are there's a keychain app for Windows, but not for Android. Um, and then in Chrome and Android, you can save passkeys in your Google Password Manager, and those will sync across everything. What's keychain? Oh, sorry. The keychain is the password manager in Apple devices, Mary Grace. So if you're already using keychain in on your Apple device, you can save your passkeys to that. Uh, if only it was a literal keychain, it'd be a lot easier to keep track of. So here comes the part where I ask you to think about a little bit. Where are, coming back to the spectrum, where's the vast majority of the folks that you're helping every day? Where do they land? Are they ones? Are they one? One. Oh, you got some twos. A two if you're lucky. All right. So we want to think through, right? Like, oh, here's some negative ones. I would love to find out what a negative one even looks like. More secure than 1234, but it's the same password or a variation of it for everything. Yeah. Right. So like, what do we what do we do with this information? Because there's one thing to know it. There's one thing to like practice it with our own selves, and then there's like the actually getting the public to use any of this, right? So I would I'd like to sort of think about giving people a couple options. Like we want to make sure that I think our duty as folks who are helping the public. Yes. Oh man. Like as people who are trying to help people use the internet safely, if we run into people who are at one, moving them on to at least a two, right? Finding a good solution for them, even if it's not perfect, um, is doing a little is doing the best we can for that person, right? And helping them be even the slightest bit secure. So what I wanted to sort of lay out was a couple different options that we can look at for sort of moving people up the spectrum, right? So one is just making sure for that patron who does have the same password for every login they have, to help them think through just what are your key accounts, right? So the email you use to log into everything, maybe your bank account and your health records. Could we help you get a strong, unique passphrase for those three, right? And you can use password 123 for everything else, but for those ones that are going to have the most impact on you, um, let's set up a unique passphrase for those three. And remembering three is substantially easier than remembering 100, right? Um, can we get them to write it down in a notebook or on a piece of paper or in their notes app? Um, so, Samantha brings up she can't even get her parents to make proper passwords. It is like the struggle is real and is constant, which is why like like when we are talking with patrons about this, trying our best to not make it an all or nothing exercise, but it's like a harm reduction exercise, right? We are not going to move everyone to hardware keys right away, um, but we can help them take those baby steps, right, to be slightly more secure. So good would be, right, like again, those key accounts, passphrases, multi-factor authentication if they can on the key accounts, and that would make them way more secure than they were previously when they walked in the door, right? Um, if we can move them to better, uh, helping them set up a password manager and use it consistently, right? Because as the advice in that EFF article I shared is that the best password manager is the one that you use, right? Because so um, the it doesn't matter how much time you spend looking into password managers to find the most secure one and the uh, most feature rich one. If you don't use it, um, it doesn't matter, right? So often, especially if we're working with patrons who are just new to this, getting them to use that Google Password Manager or the Keychain Manager can be a huge first step for them. Um, Curly mentions in the chat that when a website won't play nicely with my password manager, I get annoyed and string together a bunch of swear words that has more than once prompted the message of you have chosen a commonly used password. Because I think universally we all hate passwords. They're the worst. It is the worst possible implementation of security that people could have come up. It's what we're stuck with, right? So so if we move people to securing those three accounts to using a password manager that's easy for them to access, right? So looking at if they come in with an iPhone, can we show them how to use Keychain? If they're using Chrome all the time on the public computers, can we show them how to use the Google Password Manager, right? Um, and then there's the best option, but also we live in the real world. So like, are you a journalist or an activist or a sysadmin? No, then don't worry about it. Like don't worry about hardware keys and all that stuff. The vast majority of us do not have a risk assessment or risk profile that necessitates that level of security, and it's okay. Like we should not picture our goal as to move everyone to that level of security, because we're not going to reach it, right? Um, but let's think about like sort of like harm mitigation as we go through it. And then lastly, like to get even more in the weeds, I do want to folks to think through too, like as we're in public libraries, you're helping people both on their devices and on public computers that everyone has access to, right? So I wanted to give a couple things to think through while we're while we're helping people on public computers. So if your system is set up where people can install browser plugins or sign into browser accounts, right? Um, and the computer is set up so that it will erase all the data after that session, so that we don't have to worry about people logging themselves out. Um, then teaching people about password managers on the public computers is safe and okay, right? But if we don't have those safeguards set up in place on our public computers, if it is possible for them to just leave themselves signed in on Chrome, um, and thus sharing all their passwords with the next person who sits down in that seat, we probably aren't doing them a big favor by teaching them about password managers. And we should maybe think about providing analog ways for people to remember passwords instead of trying to push them onto password managers on the public PCs. Um, because we will not be doing anyone a benefit, right, by leaving them even more open to having all their passwords stolen by people. Yeah, care that, yeah. Um, I was I was lucky enough to start in a system that had all of that set up, um, and since then have worked in other systems that did not, and it is the absolute worst, right? It's a privacy nightmare for the patrons, and for us. Um, right. Um, and Maris brings up bearing in mind that many patrons only use public computers and don't own computers themselves, right? Um, so it is theoretically possible to like use for someone to use a password manager on their phone because many patrons have phones even if they don't have their own PC. Uh, and then having to like they could then use the password manager on their phone to enter the password from on the public PC, but that gets complicated, right? Um, of less people sharing nightmares about people still being signed in. Megan brings up we should also consider the users of public computers are not always the best tech users generally, um, or need to access sensitive information on public computers, and we should take the responsibility to clear all data and files at the end of every session. Like, hard agree there. Um, and folks have like, yeah, deep freeze and things like that. But sometimes deep freeze misses, folks have found deep freeze missing things, which is really worrisome. Um, that is the full extent of the content I prepped, but I would love to talk through any questions that folks have, or to hear from you. What did I miss? What are tips that you have found useful for helping people manufacture? Oh, Zachary brings up, don't use an LLM to create passwords. Thank you. That is a fantastic tip. Um, a large language model, an AI tool, right? So like, don't use ChatGPT or Gemini to create passwords because those are text prediction models. They will generate the most likely piece of text. Oh, Alyssa, you'd be shocked at what people do. Uh, and especially when it comes around to AI, there are people who will use it for literally everything in their lives. Right? Um, Delightful. So what questions or tips do folks have? Oh, thanks for sharing the article, Zachary. That's awesome. And I'd love to, if people want to come off mute, you can definitely do that well.
You mentioned earlier that the more often you change your password, like the easier you'll make it to like the less secure it will be. So then why do some organizations or companies ask you to change your password every 90 days, including our own library system?
Because that was standard security practice until um, I feel like around COVID was when I started seeing the studies um, that showed that that was in fact less secure over the long run. But some folks are still operating on an old model because the thinking before was that that changing it regularly mitigates the damage from it being stolen. Um, but folks have found that the trade-off just isn't worth it. So that they're just like they're operating on old data is the reason that you'll still see folks doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, changing the passwords for your office computers every 30 days is the worst. It's like they want to make you quit. I don't understand. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Oh, let me share here this. Um, I did want to share a couple really great videos on, particularly on Passkeys, because those are the newest for a lot of folks. Um, so here's an explainer from Microsoft. Um, here's an explainer from a vlogger that about how much passkeys suck, but why he still uses them in specific locations. And then for if you want to get in really deep, there's a great explanation of how passkeys actually work, because I had to gloss over a lot of the technical details here, but it's a relatively accessible explanation there. And then again, the EFF has a fantastic explainer um, about what is a passkey and how does it work too. Awesome. Well, if folks don't have any other questions, I won't keep you any longer. Carolyn, do we need any last minute wrap up here, or is that
Um, I don't have anything in particular, but I will just give people another minute in case someone's typing anything into chat that they might have, in case there might be some people who don't have microphone enabled. Um, and this is extremely helpful. I wish it were easy. Sometimes just hearing that you're not alone in experiencing difficulty with this is one of the most helpful messages that you can share. Um,
100%?
yeah, yeah.
And I think
Um,
leaning into that while helping customers too can be great, because we all know that customer that thinks that patron that thinks you have all the answers, showing them that you do not in fact have all the answers, and that we're all learning together, can be a great way of sort of dismantling some of that.
yeah. I felt that frustration from some of the less technically inclined people in my life who are sort of like think that there's a big like they're doing this to me and it's like no, this is happening to everyone and it's not personal.
Yes, you're being targeted. Everyone's getting hosed. Oh, that's very nice. Smith says these sessions are sometimes like therapy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
everyone has troubles.
we're all going through troubles, including Mary Grace, whose uh earbuds died. So
Oh no.
it's not a digital navigators meeting until somebody has some extreme technical difficulty.
100%.
All right. Well, I think what I'll do now is I will end the recording, and since we're a little bit early, we can hang out if anyone has a question they want to ask off recording. That'd be fine. And I'll just reiterate that hopefully the application for the next cohort of digital navigators will be open in the next few days. I've said it's going to be open next week for like the past 3 weeks. So I'm going to get on that and get that to you because it will start up in April. So thank you so much, Nate. It was great to have you.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for all the great questions and comments.